Thank you, Nihaya, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone, wherever you are. So as you said, Nihaya, this is a natural continuation. All what I have been hearing about in the last session was about mental health and how political violence is actually trickling down from the upper structures to the sort of the daily living of every single Palestinian and even beyond. So the fourth session is going to be mental health as an outcome here. And we have two speakers, two presenters. We have Layaly Hamayel from the Palestinian Counseling Center in the occupied Palestinian territory. And Layaly is going to share with us results of a quantitative study that's based on 10 years of follow-up on clinical records of adults seeking individual therapy and counseling. And then we follow that up with talking about children. I will introduce the second speaker later. So Layaly, the floor is yours. So I will follow up actually your approach, Nihaya. So after the presentation, we'll allow a few questions, and then the second presentation, and if we still have time, we'll reopen it again. So Layaly, the floor is yours, please.
Hello, my name is Layaly Hamayel, and I'm a researcher at the Palestinian Counseling Center. The title of my study is the 10-year pattern of mental health utilization in a nonprofit center in the West Bank and factors associated with dropout. Many factors influence therapy use, including access to services, availability of services. There are also attitudinal factors and cultural beliefs that can lead to underutilization. For example, stigma surrounding psychological symptoms, fear of disclosure, mental health literacy. Also, once individuals do reach therapy, a large percentage drops out. This leads to poor health outcomes. It affects the therapist's morale and generally just wastes resources. Both therapy utilization and therapy dropout depend on contextual factors, and this is why researchers have recommended to study them in different contexts, especially in low and middle income countries. In the recent years, a number of studies emerged locally and regionally. Most of these studies are attitude studies with university students, so it asks about their attitudes to formal help seeking. A few studies by Al-Qinawi look at actual utilization of mental health services, but it's limited to psychiatric service users. Our study is unique because it's based on actual therapy utilization behavior, and it's based on the records of 3 clinics in 3 different cities in the West Bank, and not limited to university students or psychiatric service users. We hope to, our aims are to answer the following questions. Who is more likely to seek therapy in Palestine, specifically in the West Bank, and for what reasons? What client characteristics are associated with dropout? And are there any cross-cultural or cross-regional differences and similarities in therapy utilization and in dropout patterns? We expect the majority of our sample to consist of females. Females have more positive attitudes to formal help seeking. They have more confidence in mental health providers, place more value on self-disclosure, and have higher tolerance for stigma. These findings were also found among Arab female university students. We expect the sample to have higher economic status because this facilitates, enables individuals to afford therapy and to have physical access to therapy and pay for transportation. Also, individuals with higher education tend to have more positive attitudes to therapy and tend to know more about it. We also expect our sample to have higher age, possibly because this link between therapy use and age has been found in the literature, possibly because older individuals have higher education. Studies found that never married or single individuals tend to utilize therapy more, possibly because they have less sources of social and emotional support than married clients. The most prevalent disorder tends to be anxiety, followed by mood disorder. And finally, in relation to dropout, there are many factors associated with dropout, but a large meta-analysis by Swift and Greenberg found that only lower education and lower age. So this is our hypothesis, that individuals with lower education and lower age are more likely to drop out. And we expect the percentage to be around 37.6%. To tell you a little bit about the Palestinian Counseling Center, we are a non-governmental organization that has been providing therapy to children, adults, couples, and families since 1987. Therapists have different theoretical orientations, including humanistic, psychodynamic, and CBT, but they have an eclectic approach, meaning that they use different modalities based on client needs. The participants of the sample of the study are individuals who approached the center for individual therapy, only adults and only for individual therapy between the years of 2008 and 2018 in our centers in Ramallah, Jerusalem, and Nablus. After data cleaning, the total number of participants was 1,085 clients who were included in the study. The quantitative variables include demographic information, diagnosis based on DSM-4, and information about therapy, all of which were entered by the therapist into the database in the beginning and end of therapy. We have one qualitative variable that looks at reasons for approaching therapy, and it's an open-ended question that clients fill when they first come to the center requesting therapy. So we have two variables looking at reasons for approaching therapy, one from the point of view of the therapist and another one from the point of view of the clients and how they experience their symptoms and distress. We analyzed the quantitative variables using SPSS, and we are using descriptive statistics as well as a binary logistic regression that will compare the group of clients who dropped out with the group that completed therapy. The qualitative variable is only available for half of the sample, and it was analyzed using thematic analysis by the researcher and two research assistants. The inter-rater reliability was 65%. The results show that over 2/3 of the sample were female. The mean age is 30.4, and in the graph in the top right, you can see the age distribution of the sample. There isn't a clear age distribution, but it seems to be declining. That number of clients is declining with increasing age. For education, over almost half of the sample had a BA degree or higher, and then the percentage decreases with decreasing education. Majority of the participants fall into the above average financial category, and then it also the percentage decreases with decreasing financial status, except for the very high economic condition. It's the only high economic condition that has a lower percentage than the above average. 44.1%, less than half are married, and almost an equal percentage are never married. The mean number of sessions is 23.8, and the most prevalent disorder is anxiety, closely closely followed by personality and depressive disorders, all at about around 20%. Another high diagnosis by therapists is the OCCF, which means other conditions with a clinical focus, and is just an umbrella term that includes many issues like relational problems and intimate partner violence and childhood trauma. The percentage of premature discontinuation was 39.4%. And we found a significant effect for education, so that clients with very low education are 4.1 times as likely as clients with the highest education to drop out of therapy. We also found that clients who are self-referred were 56.6% less likely to drop out as compared to clients who were referred by institutions or by doctors. The qualitative result of the show that approximately half of the clients reported relationship problems as the reason that they are approaching therapy. This is followed by anxiety symptoms such as followed by mood symptoms, fear, and psychosomatic complaints were all in the top 5 reasons. Our results show that some patterns, our sample shows patterns that are similar to universal, well-established patterns in relation to therapy use. For example, the distribution of gender, the levels of education of our sample and how they decrease with decreasing education, the economic status. Also, the percentage of dropout was very similar to the one that we expected in the hypothesis. We found a significant effect for education in relation to dropout, but only for one category, which is the lowest compared to the highest education, so not for all educational category. Also, the reasons for approaching therapy made sense in terms of literature. Almost more than 60% of the clients met at least one diagnosis for a psychological disorder. And Al-Darmaqi found in her study with Emirati students that because of stigma surrounding psychological distress and formal help seeking, students said that they will only go to therapy or counseling once they experience very high levels of distress. There were also unexpected findings that were different from that found in the literature. The marital age, for example, the never married individuals were almost the same percentage as married individuals. The age was not in line with our hypotheses. We found a significant effect for self-referrals. So it is possible that, that individuals who come to the center on their own, in our context, they would need to overcome the cultural stigma, they would need to overcome their fears of self-disclosure and of confidentiality. So perhaps they are more motivated than clients who were referred by doctors or by other institutions, such as the ministries. Age was not significantly related to dropout. Interesting finding is that we have very high percentage of personality disorders, as high as the anxiety and depressive disorders. This is very interesting finding. One possibility is that we have an overdiagnosis of personality disorders, but the results from the qualitative variable perhaps gives a different picture. Almost half of the clients are approaching therapy for relational problems. This is surprising because we tend to think of relational problems as actually providing support and contributing to resilience. So that actually could replace formal help seeking. So it is surprising that they constitute such an important reason why people approach therapy. One possibility is that individuals with personality disorder who are diagnosed with a personality disorder are also the ones who experience this disorder in the form of relational problems and express it, or this is the relational problems is what motivates them to seek therapy. We have some methodological issues that the diagnoses were based on classes of disorders, not on actual disorders, because not all therapists documented the actual disorders. So it is important for mental health studies to have MIS systems in place that sort of motivate therapists to document the disorders and also the severity of the disorder, which we did not have this information. Also, prevalence studies in Palestine, they are limited to PTSD, anxiety, and depression studies, and we could not compare our finding on personality disorders with that of a general population in Palestine. So we recommend future epidemiological studies to include research on personality disorders as well. We recommend future studies to look at how relationships affect mental health and specifically the negative aspects possibly of relationships and mental health. And finally, our study shows that there could be intercultural differences in mental health utilization and dropout, and some patterns at the same time, some patterns are similar to universal patterns. So it's important to continue to conduct research on this topic and to not just assume that there is one Arab culture and one Arab self that is inherently in conflict with Western psychotherapy. Thank you for
Thank you, Layaly. So it's this very interesting presentation and interesting shift from talking about the overall structure to the individual experiences. And again, it's a reminder to all of us that that the Palestinian individual as a person also is going through personal issues that are connected and perhaps disconnected from what's happening around. So there's definitely room for questions. I'll start with two. One sort of linking to the topic of the session and the political violence. Do you think there's any way, or did you think about overlaying the political events and economic situation over the 10 years with the kind of cases you're seeing and presentations you're seeing? So this is an interesting 10-year follow-up. And so what's happening out there politically, economically, and how is that impacting the kind of patients, complaints that are coming to the clinics? And the second question is, where are the men? So where do they go, and where do they seek counseling from your experience or observation?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for these interesting questions. I'm going to attempt to answer them more from a research point of view. I also have my colleague Rana Nashashibi and other colleagues who are part of the study, who are also psychotherapists at the center, who can kind of provide this clinical insight or answers to these questions. In terms of the political, I was actually, in the beginning of the study, we kind of went overboard with analyzing, and with making connections with the political situation, and we were kind of, thinking like, is the political situation and the occupation the reason why we have such a high percentage of personality disorders, for example? So we kind of really went overboard with that idea, and we had to stop ourselves because there isn't a prevalence study on the general population. So the problem with the current studies is that a lot of them are focused on anxiety disorders, PTSD, because we think, or the mainstream literature thinks that this is how political distress, will be expressed in the form of PTSD. There's an assumption out there in mental health studies, which is not accurate. So from a statistical point of view, it's difficult to make the connection. Maybe Rana can speak more to this point, and to also where are the men?
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you, Layaly. A great presentation, and thank you all for listening to or attending this session. Like Layaly was saying, yes, we did go overboard. We were trying to analyze, and I guess in a way overanalyze, thinking of how intergenerational trauma and cumulative trauma can affect the manifestation of symptoms that can be identified as personality disorders. But then we were not able to really do this kind of connection, so we had to drop it out. But there was a very interesting discussion there, thinking of how possibly how the type of relationship in the families of people who were expelled out of their homes in 1948, and especially in the culture of silence among many families, could have affected the nurturing aspects of, like, certain generations, where it could have been taken up and developed into a certain type of personality issues in the coming generations, the different generations from the second or third generation after 1948. But again, I mean, we couldn't really do this in a tight way, so we had to drop it. But that's something that we think we should research it more, and also ask if other people who are interested can also follow it up on that issue. Why the men do not come? Well, they do, but not in the same numbers as women, because I think basically because of the stigma or labeling. I mean, it's very hard for men in our culture to actually express their emotional needs and concerns and admit that they need help in that aspect. They would, I think mostly the psychological issues will turn out into or develop into more medical issues, because they tend to ignore it and not really go and seek help for it, because they will be stigmatized and labeled. Things are developing, things are changing, I would say, and we're seeing more men in therapy, but definitely not as many as women who are more willing to admit that they need help and they seek it.
Thank you so much, Layaly and Rana. So I don't see any hands raised. Any question? Osama, I can see your hand up there.
Yeah, thank you, Layaly and Rana, for a fascinating talk. A lot of people argue that the tools that we use to assess personality disorders and a lot of the treatments, of course, are based on Western concepts of the self and the individual and so on. And the solution is to put him in a room with someone he doesn't know so he can speak. And that these kind of psychological therapies do not fit a lot of the people in the global south naturally who have been subjected to political violence. But from your experience, what would people express as their preferred mode of therapy, right? What would they or like, do they need even therapy at all? Do they see this as something pathological that would require therapy, or that they can ventilate and talk about it within the community?
Layaly, what do you think? You want to answer, or should I
just wanted to say one point, is that I think it's kind of a mistake to say that there's one Arab self that is, and that the Arab self structure is completely out of touch with Western psychotherapy. I think we kind of need to start going more into details. What do we mean by an Arab self? What are differences by economic status, by class, by gender? We also need to start thinking what part of Western psychotherapy works and what doesn't work, rather than just kind of take it all together as one and say that it all doesn't work. So this is why I think your question is important. You know, what do people prefer in terms of therapy?
Yeah, on another note, of course, we also very much believe that we are very much against pathologizing the Palestinian people and not looking at that many times their reactions are normal and that the environment and the situation is abnormal. I mean, we don't neglect that, but at the same time, I agree with Layaly. I mean, there is still, at the center, we do have a lot of work on the community, and we believe in, you know, like the community empowerment and giving back the agency to the community, and how much that can affect the members of the community and how much it can help them to overcome also difficulties and empower them to cope with the different types of stressors that they face as a community, and you know, like in our culture, in how the community can help each other. But there's still certain types, and again, I agree with Layaly, is that in certain situations, yes, people do need to have individual interventions, and they need to have that time for themselves, because they need to process things as individuals, because it is their concerns. What type of therapy do they prefer? Most of our clients are not very educated in the types of therapies that are available, so they don't really come with certain requests. But we see that in integrative style of intervention always helps, being led by the client as to their needs. So you will find many of our colleagues using like integrative types of intervention, going from CBT to humanistic, and doing a certain type of psychodynamic thinking behind the if you like, the concern or the problem presented, using psychodynamic mostly in the analysis and trying to understand the background of the problem. But in the interventions, we use different types according to what we feel can be of more help to the clients. We also use a lot of arts in our therapy, especially expressive art. So again, it's not one type, but different ways or interventions that we see, we feel.
Thank you, Rana. Thank you, Rana. I think again, both of you, Layaly and Rana, thank you for very interesting interventions and for the questions. And Rana sort of alluded to the whole issue of agency, which is going to be the focus of the second presentation on children's agency. And our speaker is Federica Cavazzoni. I hope I pronounced it well, from the University of Milano in Italy. So the floor is yours, please.
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. And today I will present this work also on behalf of my colleague, Alec Fiorini, Ihab Gafri, Hania Ubaid, Ala Jalada, and Guido Veronesi. I will now share my screen to start with the presentation. So the title of our study is The Role of Children's Agency, towards a critical understanding of agency among children living in contexts of armed conflict and political violence. There is a widespread conception that children exposed to political violence are highly vulnerable to psychological trauma. Concerning Palestinians, several studies have assessed the negative consequences of the Israeli occupation on children's mental health and well-being. On the other hand, research agendas have started to explore children's capabilities and strategies to cope with hardships, mobilizing resources with the diverse spheres of family, community, workforce, and education, and also political and civic engagement, which all enables them to maintain a positive functioning and well-being. These are capabilities that have been studied under the umbrella term of agency. Conceptualizing agency as the individual capacity to counteract their own life course through the choices and actions they take within the opportunities and constraints of history and social circumstances, today's literature highlights that children make choices and exercise agency within the limit imposed upon them by personal factors as well as by structural distribution of norms, rules, power, and privilege. However, children's agency is a slippery term and an abstract concept, and the ability of children to choose their action and be aware of their choices is a complicated issue. Indeed, question over how children exert their own agency is something which warrants further attention. Scholars are still jointly calling for the need to develop empirical research directed at exploring the kind of agency that children have, how they exert it, how the context shapes it, and how their agency matters for their well-being. Hence, in the present study, we explored the agency of a group of children living in the occupied Palestinian territories. We worked with 75 children from 7 to 13 years old from different contexts in Palestine: villages, cities, and refugee camps. Recognizing agency as situated in practices and actions taking place in a specific social and temporal context, we focused on how children function within and across their everyday life in order to uncover how they are able to navigate the environment and activate whatever resources exist in it. Therefore, to observe how children act within the environment to protect themselves and preserve their overall well-being, our participatory approach encompassed a place-based method focused on children agency. Starting from the observation of how children participate within the social and physical environment, we sought to detect the many diverse ways they engage with their surrounding. More specifically, we asked all children to draw a map representing all significant places in their neighborhood, perceived both as safe and unsafe, and then to describe it. Then they were invited to continue the conversation into the places themselves. Following a walk-around technique, the children guided the research team around these spaces, narrating and describing their experiences. We were able to identify different themes depicting the many ways in which children exerted their agency or activated their surrounding resources. This first dimension was related to children's perception of safety and security within their social and physical environment. All the participants reported experiencing either physical threats or a general feeling of vulnerability due to the attacks from both the Israeli army as well as intra-community violence. The environment was widely perceived as unhealthy or unpredictable, enhancing feeling of fear, sadness, and distress. The children described feeling unsafe as a source of negative emotions with consequent sleep problems and psychological distress. These factors were acting as a significant deterrent of children's agency, impacting children's well-being and reducing the normal activities of their everyday life, such as going to school and studying. Children described safety as the foundation for their agency and located their ability to act autonomously, mostly in safe environment. Indeed, they were often actively engaged in developing their own strategies to feel secure enough to keep on with their favorite activities and thus act upon the limitations imposed upon them by fear. Moreover, maps and narratives were studied with houses of relatives and friends, marked as safe landmarks within their neighborhood. Social bonds were mentioned as crucial to mitigating the negative effects of the violence they experienced, reducing feeling of isolation and improving their ability to cope with the overall insecurity around them. Feeling connected to and thus protected by their family and community provides the children with a secure base, sustaining their relationship with both people and the place itself, and enabling them to navigate the environment. Indeed, the importance of the freedom or the prohibition to physically explore their surroundings emerged as a crucial factor from both the children's maps and walking tours. Some drawings included different streets and paths, as you can see here, showing the ability of the child to move around, their awareness to move around, and their awareness of the roads to reach their places. In contrast, other maps offered a more schematic collection of places the children liked, without any precise geographical connection between them. The imposed restrictions limited children's opportunity to explore the environment and denied them access to many resources, which reduce children's ability to engage and develop their own independent strategies of coping and survival. However, participants all displayed many strategies in order to challenge this imposed limitation, thereby regaining control over the environment and reducing feelings of helplessness and isolation. Moreover, participants stressed the importance of having access to places where they can enjoy their childhood before growing up. Children described as being safe as long as their cities, villages, or camps were able to support their needs, providing them with spaces where they could enjoy leisure activity freely and safely. Indeed, the lack of play areas was limiting children's opportunities to engage in these activities, which are well-known healing experiences. Most of the children reported and acted upon different strategies that they had developed to rework the environmental resources and improve the quality of their free time. Being able to access the schools provided children with the opportunity of a safe place through which engage in activities of learning, playing, and socializing, which is even more crucial amidst the chaos of the occupation, incursions, or displacement. Indeed, school restores a sense of routine and normalcy in children's lives, which enhance their ability to cope with their adverse situation. Moreover, going to school was described as a way to strengthen personal abilities, thereby enabling them to someday play their part in improving the situation of their family or also of their country. Education was described as a means of resisting the occupation, challenging male-dominated social or cultural norms, and also helping women claim their rights and assert themselves within the community. Studies concerning children living in contexts of war and conflict have shown how children's agency should also be recognized as emerging out of the cultural and political discourse. For instance, in front of the separation wall, a 13-year-old girl from Day1 camp described how the graffiti on the wall has been critically important for understanding her country's situation and the meaning of the wall itself. Similarly, this 11-year-old boy from Nablus, like you can see here, he drew our attention to the many photos of the martyrs hung up in the street, explaining that those pictures are here to teach us and remind us that these people died in order to protect us and our country. In our finding, the immediate environment, such as streets, walls, or fences, emerged as an important medium through which to access information, and it was often used by children to improve their historical and political awareness. Being able to make sense of the surrounding violence children experienced was significant in reducing negative emotions such as insecurity and hopelessness, and it enables the mobilization of their resources. In the narrative of our participants, by actively reading the signs of their complex surroundings, most of them reveal their ability to understand the relationship between the history of previous generations and their own present situation. Coming here reminds us that it is our right to ask for our cities back, since they have stolen from the original owner. For what concern our study limitation, firstly, the gender imbalance in the group of participants prevented us from providing a more detailed picture of the gendered features of agency. However, we were able to draw some consideration. Although our children face diversity in situations of armed conflict, female participants encountered more gender hierarchies in structuring and limiting their lives and action. The combination of insecurity created by the occupation, as well as the cultural and gender norms that are keeping girls out of the public sphere, both result in them having less services and resources in comparison with their male counterparts. As the girls often explained, they experienced limitation and marginalization due to the different forms of gender inequality that were negatively impacting their personal growth and development, making it more difficult for them to achieve their goals later in life. Yet, they powerfully affirm their willingness to challenge the norms that were depriving them their freedom, displaying a strong sense of agency in the process. Then, a second limitation is related to the contradictory aspect of children's agency that we were unable to grasp within the study. Agency should also be assessed within its destructive forms, as children may exercise it against their own best interests as well as against those of others. Perhaps because our focus was directed at detecting those practices of agency by which children preserve and enhance their well-being, we may have overlooked possible self-destructive practices. Finally, to conclude, our findings suggest that children are capable of adjusting to traumatic experiences, even in contexts characterized by chronic extreme violence. Such as a perspective on children's competence challenges the widely accepted definition of children as vulnerable and more at risk than adults when exposed to conflict and military violence. Indeed, a focus on agency allows us to pay attention to the children's many ways of comprehending and responding to the challenging situation in which they live. Moreover, acknowledging the complementary role of structure and agency, our study has shown how the ability of young people to exert agency is strongly shaped by the fields of social, political, and environmental structures in which their lives are embedded. Indeed, children's agency emerge as strongly related to the fact that their society and environments offer them independence and thus more opportunities to enjoy and develop strategies to take active control over their own lives. Therefore, our study highlights the role of social, economic, political, and material constraints that effectively limit and shape the extent by which children's agency can be exerted. In accordance with other scholars, this is a fundamental step in order to not overemphasize agency, which might deflect attention away from those with moral and legal responsibilities to improve children's life chances. As stated by a 10-year-old boy from Gaza, the real need to improve their happiness and well-being is the end of this occupation. If the occupation vanishes, we can start to work and better many things within us and our society. As long as the occupation is here, this is very difficult to imagine. To protect children and promote their own natural resources, psychological approach designed to foster children's agency should promote and safeguard human rights by supporting political action aimed at improving the quality of life and civil rights of oppressed population and advocating for justice. Thank you very much, and here are our emails. Thank you.
Thank you, Federica, for a very, very interesting presentation here. And thank you for ending up by reminding us that we shouldn't overemphasize agency at the expense of children's rights and people and children's right to live happily without trying their best to adjust to atrocities around them. So I think this is an important point there. So the floor is open for questions. It's any questions there. So I will be looking at hands. See if any is, yeah, I see, I think one hand, 1 second. Harry Shannon, please. Is it, go ahead.
Federica, very nice presentation, thank you. Can you tell us a bit more about where the children came from, how you identified them and included them in your study?
Sure, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. And yeah, so this was part of my PhD project. So I had kind of good enough time to work on this. And all the children were going in association, different association with which we cooperate. And so during my PhD project, I was going in this association in order to make activities and make also like know the children and be integrated with all our team, because we were 5-6 people working together. So the children were chosen by the local association. Actually was proposed, the activity was proposed to all the children were there and the families. And so usually, I mean, for example, in Gaza and in LPHA camp, most of the children participate, all the ones that were going to the association. In other contexts, such as Nablus, we were there during summertime, so some of them were staying with family and going to vacation. So it was mostly a purposive sample. We just focused on the age and to have both genders. Then, as you say, as I told in the presentation, in some contexts we had some much more female than male. For example, in LPHA camp, we had mostly 70% of the participants were female. And this was also something we discussed about, because, I mean, we were going in the association and we were reaching all the children participating in the association activities. And I mean, for example, in LPHA camp, most of the families were saying that place, the association place, was one of the few places for the girls to go and play safely, while the boys has more places to go. And so effectively we had mostly or female. So I don't know if I answered the question.
Well, if I can maybe follow it up, I mean, do you think the children you included were more likely to have higher degrees of agency? And if so, if you had taken children with lower degrees, might you be able to see more factors that allowed some children to develop agency and others not to?
I could say that we start this study, I mean, the first part of the study, because it was part, as I said, of my PhD program. So the first part was a quantitative study where I was trying to explore children's agency in a larger number and to see if I could find differences between between the context, the living context, or the gender. And then I started with the qualitative studies. So in the quantitative studies, I had this kind of, I mean, there were association and places and where I got very high level of agency from the questionnaire and the instrument that I had, that they were not really, I mean, able, I think, to grasp, also because they were all Western built. And then I went with the qualitative studies, and I kept the same context in order to see, okay, for example, in Gaza Strip, in the places where we work, so we were in Gaza City, in Jabalia refugee camp. In the quantitative data, I could see that in the agency reported in the sample of Gaza was really low in comparison with the others. And then when we went on with the qualitative one, and so we started to ask and to try to observe, we could see that most of the questions related to agency that were in the questionnaires was also about the possibility of movement around, the chance to reach places by your own, or the safety perceived in a place or another. And it was something that was really missing in Gaza, but on the other side, they were expressing it in totally different ways that we were not able to catch with the questionnaire that we used, but we were able to observe and to see it in the qualitative one. So that's also was one of the starting point where we, one of our colleagues that she's also from Palestine and she is making her PhD in our university, she started to work on the qualitative data to try to develop a new instrument for assessing agency built on the qualitative data. So in order to have a more context-specific and cultural sensitive instrument of agency developed in Palestine. And I see that there is here also my colleague and my professor, Guido Veronese. I don't know if he wants to add something about that, or anyway, he was part of the project too.
Okay, good day, everybody. Yes, I want to add this point. I think the issue Harry raised is very relevant and a sort of bias. Most probably, we were in touch with children with a high level of agency and very eager to participate, to be part of the research. And I think to try to overcome such a kind of issues of bias is much needed to start deeper ethnographic studies being merged and spending time, longer time with children and trying to observe larger context and most probably to try and differentiate different levels of agency. And maybe that could be a future advancement of our research.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Federica, I don't know how relevant it is, but the focus has been on the physical space. So was the cyberspace ever taken into consideration? Children and youth using the screens and social media as a way of networking and connecting with others. So was cyberspace part of the study, or at least considering it as an extra sort of medium for children to express themselves?
Thank you very much for the question. And actually, it's something we were discussing at the end, and we didn't work on the cyberspace, but after these 2 years of only virtual relationship and virtual life, we're discussing about that to explore more and to consider the cyberspace more in children's everyday action and movement and way to communicate and to work. I mean, one interesting work was I lately read about was made in Gaza about the guys, they make the parkour, and they studied a lot of the cyberspace as a way to express and to talk with the world and to keep communication and to arise information and sharing experiences. So thank you. I mean, we didn't use it in we didn't also because I mean, the children were different ages and we work with different contexts, but surely we were discussing it to add for further research.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that gets us to the conclusion of this session and of this afternoon. So today we covered the issues related to the Great March of Return and then political violence in 2 sessions. Tomorrow we are expected to reconvene at 1 p.m. Jerusalem time. So again, we have 3 sessions tomorrow afternoon, one on women's health, the other on children and adolescents, and the third is on environmental health. I thank you all for joining the conference, for your engagement. Unless there's any comment or instructions from the coordinator,